to be working towards another comparative essay. It's going to be similar to the last one we did in terms of you're going to be talking about gender again, but this time in a very quite um, a different form, because we're going to be looking at these advertisement posters for film and television programs, which allows us to talk a lot more about narrative. Now, well done to those of you who got the essays in regarding the two chocolate advertisements from last time. There's some good work done in there. And what we're going to do is I'm going to set you a task by Friday to have put some notes together on these two sources. You'll hand that in on Friday. I'll have a look at those, and then on Monday next week I'll make another video where we sort of plan the essay together, and then you can write it up next week for me. So we're going to be looking at the poster advertisement from 1974 for the James Bond film The Man with the Golden Gun, and then we're going to be looking at the poster for the current BBC drama Killing Eve, which is a fantastic piece of television. I'm sure some of you have seen it already, I would imagine. If not, it is very, very good, and well worth watching. Very funny, very dark in its humour, some brilliant acting and performances in it, and also very interesting in terms of its representation of gender. So yeah, well worth a watch. So these two adverts then. Let's start off with what we can remember about The Man with the Golden Gun. So this was Roger Moore's second outing as James Bond. It was set against the background of the global energy crisis which was going on during that time. So the world was incredibly concerned because a trade embargo had been put on oil from a lot of oil producing nations around the Middle East, which meant that essentially these countries were refusing to trade or putting huge prices on oil, and the world was all very panicked about what it was going to do for its energy. Now you can sort of see this represented here with these images of the laser pointing at Bond, the explosion here in what looks like some kind of factory setup. Now, of course, the things we remember are that Bond himself is the centre of the image. He creates this suave, relaxed, calm persona, even though he's completely surrounded by all this chaos. His brand of masculinity is to remain cool, calm, and collected in the middle of all that. Okay, we can see he's surrounded by this leaping car. We've got these exotic-looking locations. This is a representation of the Far East. You've then got these sort of characters seeming to wish him harm with this laser, with this guy pointing the gun here, and yet in the middle of it all, his masculinity is represented as keeping him completely calm, completely suave, completely unflapped by all the stuff that is going on around him. We've got this mid shot of him, of course, showing his tailored suit, showing his gun, which are signs that connote to us power, status, wealth, investment of quality items. He is, of course, the center of everything. So again, you've got the gun pointing at him, which creates the Enigma code. Who is this? Who is holding this gun? Again, we've got connotations of wealth and power through the metal gold. His name being inscribed. His code, his 007 agent code being inscribed on the bullet is designed to draw us further into the story. There's this idea connoted of sort of what would have been considered exotic. He was part of his appeal was that he was this quintessentially British spy, but he was seen to go off into these very exotic locations all around the world. And here, as I say, we can see this depiction of the sort of Far East. We can also see this depiction of a female character doing kung fu. Now, at the time, kung fu movies were incredibly popular through the films of people like Bruce Lee. So Bond, bringing this into a Bond film is perhaps a sort of acknowledgement of how popular that form was. But now we come to the representation of these two women, of course. Three women, I should say. that is going to give you a lot more ammunition to talk about with your answer. So thinking about it, we've got two women who are very highly sexualized in terms of how they're presented. We can see the way sort of her body's curving towards Bond. We can see they've been positioned not wearing very much. Lots of stuff about the way they're presented is designed to focus on sexualizing them, okay? With the possible exception of this woman down here that we'll come on to. Now, their body language is interesting. Note that they're both smaller than Bond in this depiction, so I'm sure you can make inferences about the depiction of gender through that. Look at the way that she seems to perhaps be protecting Bond from this golden gun, whereas she seems to be perhaps pointing towards him. So is there an enigma code here that she is a kind of betrayer while she is a protector? Either way, you can see that both of their roles in this story are related directly to him. She is coming between him and the gun, she gesturing towards him. The point is that he is the center of everything. His position in the poster and his perhaps masculinity all connote that his is the important role within this. And these women are here to primarily be beautiful and sort of aesthetically pleasing, and their role in the story is very much in relation to Bond. It doesn't connote to me that they're going to have interesting story arcs of their own. They are here as their role is to sort of tell the story through Bond, right? The slight exception could be this woman here, who's obviously meant to be seen as perhaps more powerful and dangerous, and also is shown to be a kind of gifted fighter. Now, you can make what you will of that. Is the fact that she's shown to be a fighter showing that there is a more powerful representation of gender, or is the fact that she's smaller and you can't see her facial features suggesting that this power that she has is actually less important than the beauty possessed by these two characters here? You'll notice as well, these two women are much more stereotypically Western looking, while this woman here is depicted perhaps as a more Eastern looking character. So you could perhaps draw links in between gender and the representation of race and ethnicity as well. So plenty to talk about there. Again, I know this is quite similar to the work we did on Quality Street, so I thought it's a kind of good idea to approach the same question from a different angle, and then next time we'll move on to a different subject. We won't talk about gender representation next time round, but I thought while we'd just done it, it might be a good idea to consolidate. So let's go across to Killing Eve then. So Killing Eve, by way of contrast, is heavily centered on female characters. If you haven't watched the show, this is Jodie Comer, who plays a character called Villanelle, who is a contract killer and also a psychopath. So she's a hit woman, or a hit person essentially. Sandra Oh's character, Eve, the eponymous Eve from the Killing Eve title, she becomes kind of obsessed with her, and they develop this sort of unusual relationship where that Eve is kind of trying to catch her, but is also sort of fascinated by her, and similarly Eve is sort of fascinated by her, and they have this weird sort of relationship that developed for it. But anyway, yeah, I don't want to spoil it for you, it's very good. But gender is represented in a very, very different way here. You can see they're both still depicted as in a beautiful way, right? You can see they're both very striking looking. The way that they're dressed, you could argue, is to highlight their beauty also. But look at the difference between the way Sandra Oh and Jodie Comer are depicted in this poster compared to these two women over here, right? Crucially, of course, there is no man in this picture. There is no male figure. So straight away, they are becoming the central part of the narrative. And the where you could argue here, the Enigma code, the Roland Barthes Enigma code, could be how do these women relate to Bond? Here, of course, the Enigma code is how do these two women relate to each other? And this straight line, I think, is really interesting as it draws the sort of division between the two women, and yet similar colours in what they're wearing, and a lot of similarities in the way the two halves of the poster are put together. So you're immediately drawn in. That Enigma code has given you the idea of this kind of interesting division between the two of them, but also a really strong connection between the two of them. And again, crucially, in terms of representation of gender, it's their story. It's the story of these two women and what goes on between these two women. There isn't a male figure for them to fawn around and be sexualized by. This is their story. I would certainly look at the. I mean, what does that remind you of there? Those ribbons, they scream blood to me. I would say. Obviously, they kind of look like fabric as well. They sort of look like extensions of what the two of them are wearing, but I think there's a lot of connotations of blood, aren't there? And now you could say again, maybe that a more powerful representation of a female within a story? Has blood traditionally been the the sort of male area of storytelling, right? Look at the case of Bond. Bond's whole reason of being is to get the bad guys, right? And blood is usually something that's reserved for him. He causes the blood of his enemies. If these women were to bleed, it would be their own blood, and that would be the end to their time in the story. Here, however, the connotation seems to be much more that these two women are perhaps going to bring the blood, or a part of the blood of the story, be that metaphorical blood or be that kind of literal, the bringing harm and death and destruction. I mean, she's an assassin, so you can probably make some assumptions around that. They've both got something around their throats, which I think is quite interesting, because perhaps traditionally the idea of a female character with something around their throat would connote that woman being in trouble. Here, however, I don't think it connotes that at all. I think that connotes power. So again, you've got that kind of subversion, that kind of change of typical gender representations. So what I would like you to do, I'm going to put this PowerPoint in your assignment, and I'm also going to put a Google Doc in there, and all you need to do is by Friday, you need to have made 2 bullet point lists of all the different ways that gender is represented in both posters, okay? Make sure you get those in by Friday. I will have a look at what you've come up with, and then, as I said, I'll make a new video for Monday next week where I put those ideas together, and then I'll sort of plan the essay response for you. No, sorry, not for you. And you can have a go at that. Okay, so, all right, I'll see you next time.